She's 8 years old, she plays as black against the Grandmaster, she plays the Caro-Kann defense, one of the toughest openings in chess, and she gets 98.5% accuracy, and all of that in a blitz game. What's up, chess player, and welcome to the Journey to Grandmaster, the place where you can improve every aspect of your chess game. Please remember this name, Bodhana 7 and done. She's representing England, she's 8 years old, and we are gonna talk a lot more about her in the future, because from the quality of the game, you can definitely feel that it's just something incredible. It's not just a random result, it's not just a luck that you have on your opponent blunders, it's a phenomenal positional understanding for this age. Absolutely incredible. Now I want to show you this amazing game of an 8 years old girl. She's playing the Caro-Kann defense here, d5, bishop f5, the main line here, h4. Well, as you know, white is trying to catch this bishop quickly, so you should be careful with moves like e6. h5, black is stopping it immediately, c4, black takes. So far she plays everything according to the theoretical lines here. e6. I mean, I can't even imagine how you can remember the theoretical line when you're 8 years old. I mean, that is truly, truly amazing, but it's just the beginning. Knight d7, all the best moves. And now knight to b6, well, very reasonable move, attacking the bishop. Chess.com says it's an inaccuracy, but Chess.com doesn't know. We are talking about 8-year-old girl, and she is playing just fantastic. I mean, I don't have any words to explain it. 24, 50, 100 rated Grandmaster sits there as white, just pushing her, and she doesn't care. She makes all of the fantastic moves here. Let's see. Bishop d3 just takes, knight d7. Chess.com says it's a mistake, but I mean, she's developing the pieces. Isn't that exactly what I'm teaching you in all of my videos? Development is the key. You need to bring all of the pieces into the game, and that's exactly what she's doing. Bishop g5, Queen d7, yeah, just get rid of this pin so that the knight can be developed somewhere, and then the bishop is also free to go. Everything incredibly logical. Yeah, knight goes to the center of the board, centralize your pieces. That is understanding, cold understanding all of the key principles. I'm truly amazed by this talent here. Knight d4, yeah, black has some weaknesses here. That is, of course, very important to take a look at, but as long as we have this bishop on f8, we are out of the danger. So knight b4 has been played. Well, this is a kind of an aggressive move. I mean, you play blitz, and normally you want to get some counterplay, you want to attack. That's also very understandable here. And that is a very instructive moment. Now, the white has to move the queen, obviously, but the question for you is, where would you place it? White played quite an obvious move, which is a mistake, and the right move is not obvious at all. Okay, I hope you have found it. So white has played here queen to b3, which seems like a logical move, protecting the pawn on a2, because not only the queen was under attack, it was a double attack, the pawn is also hanging. So queen b3. But the problem with the move is that it allows queen d5, and our wunderkind immediately jumps on the opportunity and plays queen d5, because this move now exchanges the queens, which makes black's task much, much simpler. And that's truly amazing. I mean, that is a positional understanding, that you really need to exchange those queens so that in the endgame you have more chances to survive. It's not about tactics, it's not about calculating 1-2 moves variations. I mean, she shows her understanding of so many different aspects of the game, and that is truly exceptional. So the right move here was queen to b1 instead. I mean, no one in a blitz game in their right mind will understand that that is a right move here, just yeah, planning to push the knight back and protecting the knight on e4, and most importantly, not allowing black to exchange the queens. So queen d5, now knight c3, and black is just taken here. No advantage for black at all. We just need to finish the development. The best move yet again, knights b to d5, because, well, the knight is not doing much on b4. This square might be available for the bishop later on, and on d5, well, you can't imagine a better square for the knight to be as d5. Rook h3, bishop b7, yeah, developing another piece. The only problem there might be with this move is that once you exchange the bishops, as I said, you have a lot of weaknesses here on the dark squares. But the good thing is you get rid of some pieces, and the more you exchange, the simpler it gets. So g6, and you would say if you're a grandmaster, you're playing against such a young talent, you think, well, okay, maybe she knows the opening theory, maybe she can calculate the variations like crazy, but no chance she's gonna understand all of the endgame nuances. Well, guess what? You're completely wrong if you think that. So, rook b8, protecting the pawn, knight c8, trying to exchange this very powerful knight. Once again, you need to exchange the pieces if you have some space problem, if you have some development problem. Exchanging the pieces is the best thing you can do. Knight c4, that is why white avoids the trades. b5, now going forward, pushing the knight even further. So she has her spirit there, you have to admit it. Now, knight goes to a5. Of course, there is a drawback behind the b5 pawn. Remember, b5 pawn move. Remember that pawns never go back. And yeah, now c6 is quite a weakness, so we have to deal with it. But rook b6, defending it for now. King b1. White is preparing this second attack on the pawn. He's like a shark. He sees an opportunity to create a threat, to go for some target, and he does it immediately. So, black played here rook a6. Well, quite an understandable wish just to get rid of this annoying knight who is attacking the pawn on c6. There is one little problem with it, though. It now allows whites to play knight to b7. The rook was controlling this square, it's not anymore, and knight b7 is a huge problem here, because now both of the knights are ready to occupy those weak dark squares. Remember, we talked about it earlier in the game. It's very dangerous to have your weaknesses. It's very dangerous to have dark squares weaknesses like that if you don't have a dark squares bishop. If we would still have it somewhere here, that would be totally fine. We would at least exchange the bishop for one of the knights and solve pretty much all of our problems. But when we have to face both of those knights occupying those dark squares, they're going to be just monsters. But she just handled it all perfectly. Let's see how it was possible. Rook goes back to b6. Knight goes to c5, perfect move. a5. Once again, she wants to create her own counterplay. You can never survive if you're just waiting for your opponent to come at you and just crush you. No, that strategy never works. You need to create your own attacks. So, rook f3. Yeah, there is another potential weakness here on f7. So far, well protected, but if the knights somehow jump on this opportunity to target the pawn, that might be a problem. So rook f8 has been played just to defend it. Yeah, it seems a little bit passive, but as long as we are solid, as long as we protect all of our weaknesses, everything should be good. But once again, you have a feeling, I mean, you are playing against the kid. At some point, the kid should collapse. It's not possible that she maintains the entire pressure for the entire game. It's just too high level. Grandmaster, very experienced one against 8-year-old girl. I mean, seems like there is no chances at all, and also the position is very difficult to handle, but guess what? She did it. I mean, that is truly amazing. Rook g1, white prepares the move g4, trying to create yet another weakness in black's camp. Remember the principle of two weaknesses? Well, you might say there are two weaknesses here, but it's better to create a third one. The more weaknesses you create in your opponent's camp, the better. So rook g1, a4, black is continuing with her counterplay. That's perfect here, because now the file is opened and black has some ideas here. That is great, and that would be a very huge factor later on in the game. So instead of b takes a, white should have just ignored it altogether and continue with the plan, not allowing black to free this rook and make it active. So please remember this lesson. You always must watch out for your opponent's counterplay no matter what, and make your best to stop all of your opponent's active opportunities. So why on earth would you make it simpler for black to activate the rook and create some threats here along the b file? Hard to understand. I guess the point was to create a weakness here on a4. The pawn will be always attacking, but well, it comes at a price, and the price is pretty high. Namely, rook comes here to b4, and then the rook is completely active. I mean, compare this rook on d4 to this one on b6. The one on b6 was doing absolutely nothing, just protecting this c6 pawn, but, well, it's not enough for an entire rook. It's a very powerful piece, But now with this idea of a4, I have to give the credit. That is a beautiful idea, sacrificing the pawn here just to activate the rook, to get some activity for it. And now the rook is in the center of the board, controlling so many squares, putting pressure on white's pieces. I mean, that is a completely different story. And now white goes back, apart from this idea, because I guess he understood that it's not really possible anymore to go on with that attack, even though I would argue it was possible, but he was scared because black has now their own counterplay, and that is, of course, something to take into account. Knight b6, activating yet another piece, rook e8. You feel like black pieces are just coming away, and now it's a completely different story. Now black is fighting for the initiative because, well, d4 pawn is gone, e5 is now weaker. Once it's gone, there are no weaknesses among dark squares anymore for black, not really. c6 is still a weakness, but it's just one pawn. If you can get something for it, it's totally fine to lose it, so let's see how it happened. Takes, and once again exchanges. The more pieces you exchange, the simpler it gets for you to deal with all of the threats. So that is like a perfect instructive lesson for us to learn how you should handle worse positions, because let's be honest, who didn't have a difficult position to handle as black, especially if you play Caro-Kann, you need to suffer so much. I mean, I personally don't get why people play Caro-Kann, but that's another story. And you need to handle all of that pressure, so let's see how black did it. Knight c7, the knight is coming back to action. Maybe knight b6 was a little bit more active here, but still the main thing is the pieces are going forward. And notice this knight on d5, it was here for the entire game, and it's still there controlling so many squares. That's just a fantastic piece. Once you have a well-protected knight in the center of the board, there is nothing better you can do here. Knight a5, well, creating a huge threat here. Knight c6 with a fork, so king goes to d7, and white finally wins the pawn here. But thanks to the pieces activity, black has some compensation for it. Knight b5 takes, and e5 might be hanging. This knight might jump, so especially in a blitz game, it's just far from being over. But once again, if you're remembering the fact that a grandmaster, Nevednichi Vladislav, plays as white, and an 8-year-old girl plays as black, you think, well, no chance in hell black is able to survive in this position. Well, if you think that, once again, you're completely wrong. Let's see what happened later on. Knight g5, and here is another very instructive moment. Seems like f7 pawn is the most important one, so intuitively you want to save it, and that is why black played king e7. But in fact, there was a huge chance just to equalize the position after knight to e3. You give up this pawn, but you take the g1, which is also very important for white. You're attacking h4, which is incredibly weak, and now e5 is also hanging rook c4, probably the only chance to still defend the pawn. But now there are so many weaknesses in white's camp that you just proceed to attacking all of them, and white has nothing to deal with it. Knight g5, yeah, protecting this one. But guess what? You have another weakness on e5, and you can't really protect it with f4 because h4 will be hanging. So black is basically equalizing here. But especially in the blitz game, of course, you don't want to lose such a pawn on f7, which stabilizes the entire pawn structure. So you want really to preserve it. So instead of knight e3, black played king e7, rook went to c8, rook b7, very important to cover this 7th rank, so that now the knight is free to go. g3, yeah, white is trying to say, well, my pawn structure is incredibly solid, you can't do anything for me. Knight e3 still coming, knight e5 is a threat, if the rook leaves, knight c4 is a threat. The engine doesn't really like it, but well, when you're playing as a human being, you have to go forward, you have to create some threats, and rook h8, the normal human idea, once again, to create some pressure against the pawn. Notice that white will attack the f7 pawn, and then if the king goes away, trying to protect the pawn with a rook, then there would be knight takes e6, taking advantage of the fact that the pawn is pinned. So the idea is very good, especially in a blitz game. But there is a problem with that. Namely, black can create a counter threat, knight c4 attacking both of the pawns now, and once you go here, I don't really care about this pin anymore. You can get this pawn, but there is king g8, and suddenly, even though the king seems to be in trouble, the rook is in trouble too. If you can go to h6, the knight is hanging, you can't really go to g7, because I'm gonna play King h8, and now all of your pieces are under attack. So black is kind of protecting tactically here, whereas this knight is very active, creating so many threats. So that could have been a nice move for black. Instead, black played knight f5, which has a similar idea. Well, we are not afraid to lose the pawn, so meanwhile we want to create some counter threat. g4, and now white is attacking here, takes, and knight goes back to e3. Of course, black's task is to exchange as many pieces as possible. Now h5, white is creating this passer. That could be very, very dangerous, and as black, when you're sitting there, you might feel, yeah, that could be really dangerous. I have to be careful about it. So black took it, of course. We always want to exchange as much stuff as possible. And now finally, this knight comes where it belongs, namely to c4, the most active square on the entire board, because we are attacking here, we are attacking here. The king is too far away to attack, and that is what saves black in this game. Yes, white have this passer. That is still very dangerous. If you imagine it coming to h7, then the rook goes away, the pawn is protected. Basically, white is promoting the pawn. So it feels very, very dangerous. So it's even more impressive that black still found the move knight to c4. I mean, Bodhana Sivanandan is the name. Hopefully I pronounce it correctly, but we all gonna need to learn it later on because, well, that is just truly amazing here what she did. So knight c4, pawn goes to h6. Now rook takes b2 check, and the rook flies to h2, controlling this h-file. Very important. One of the most important principles in the endgame, in the rook's endgame, put your rook behind the passer pawn. And it doesn't matter if it's your own pawn or your opponent's pawn, you always put the rook behind, not in front of it. Because if you do that, your rook is very active, controlling pretty much the entire file. And the further the pawn gets, the more squares you control. And the rook that stands in front of the pawn is very passive then. Well, but white still has this extra pawn, h7, and that feels very dangerous now. White is just one move away from just winning the game with rook going somewhere, and then h8 is unstoppable. So black takes the second pawn just yet, and just in time to jump with the knight back to g6 and control this key h8 square. That is what makes it possible to survive for black. Rook a7 check, king goes to f6. Now you can take the pawn on f7 with the rook, but then your knight is hanging. No problem for black as long as black controls this h8 square, and you can even take with the knight, which, yeah, seems like controlling the h8 square, but now rook takes h7 is possible and you don't have any discover checks, and in fact black is just a pawn up. So the moves are repeated here. Knight e4 check, king goes to g7. Of course we need to be closer to the pawn, we want to just get rid of it. So knight goes back, and now we go once again back. King attacks the knight, and there is no way for white to somehow create any threat, so the players agree to a draw. So here you have it. 8-year-old Sivanandan Bodhana plays this absolutely amazing game, playing a draw against a grandmaster in the Caro-Kann defense when you're 8-year-old. She won a women prize in this tournament. That was a European Blitz Chess Championship. I mean, that is truly amazing. Now, in this video, you are gonna see the most beautiful game of the entire 20th century, 2 World Chess Championship. Every move is an instructive lesson to learn, so definitely take a look at it. And now it's time to improve your chess.